those viewers who are at home watching the meeting via the live stream. For the first time in a long while, tonight's meeting is being held entirely in person. Here we all are. It's a nice change. We'll be returning to e-voting tonight, councillors, so barring some of those simple procedural votes that I may just ask for a hand, just remember we're going to be back to pressing the little head on the electronic voting screens. If I could now please ask you all to be upstanding, and Councillor Proud could ask you to read out the opening prayer.
Almighty God, we ask you to guide us in all our discussions, to show goodness, honesty, understanding and wisdom in all that we undertake to do. May we respect each other's views at all times, and we ask this in your name. Amen.
And if I could ask you all to remain standing, Councillor Farrelly, could you please read out the acknowledgement of country?
On behalf of councillors, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, on which this meeting is taking place, and show our respects for elders past, present and emerging. Thank you,
and you can all take your seats, thanks. Without prior approval, any recording of this meeting is prohibited. No action should be taken on any resolution of council prior to the written advice from the council being received. Takes us to item 1, which is the official opening of the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, I declare the council meeting of the 14th of June 2022 open at 6:30 p.m. Item 2, attendance and apologies. I do have an apology this evening from Councillor Andrea Criado. Item 3, approved leave of absence. Councillor Bianca Sandri has been granted the leave of absence for the period 8th of June through to 23rd of June inclusive. Item 4, disclosures of interest. And the disclosures from the Planning and Development Committee meeting can be found on the agenda of tonight's meeting and are displayed on the screen behind me. For the council meeting this evening, I so far have Councillor Felicity Farrelly disclose an impartial interest in item 12.2 DS1 as she has spoken to the proponent and has emailed replies to many residents. I have one from myself relating to item 13.5. It's an impartial interest because the event organisers are well known to me. And I have for the same item 13.5 by Councillor Kristovich, and impartial as the proponents are also known to him. Councillor Farrelly, you're indicating?
Yes. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I also know the people, the organisers for item 13.5.
Thank you. And if you can just make sure you do the paperwork, Councillor. Yeah. And just as a general, so just raise your hands and I'll call you out. So there's several councillors here who would know one of the proponents probably fairly well from her time on council. So I know Councillor Farrelly, Councillor Lagan, Councillor Perkoff, Councillor Hatton, Councillor Reid, Councillor, yeah, all councillors will, I'm sure, fill out that paperwork. Declare early, declare often, councillors. There you go. All right, any other declarations? If not, I will move on to item 5, petitions. And I'll move first of all to item 5.1, petition on the establishment of traffic calming methods on Davenport Street. Councillor Farrelly, would you like to read that out, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is following through from the last council meeting that a petition that contains 35 verified signatures has been received by the city, that they request that the city give full consideration for the installation of pedestrian crosswalks on Davenport Street, Burrows Road and Francis Avenue, Karrinyup, for the benefit of pedestrians accessing the Karrinyup shopping centre. They also believe that with Davenport Street, Burrows Road and Francis Street all need to be 40 kilometres per hour with flashing lights to indicate this. 40 kilometre per hour flashing lights signs on all 3 streets are considered a high priority by the locals, and additionally would like to see speed humps considered to slow down the hoon traffic, who seem to have a feeling that they can drag race around the shopping centre on Saturday nights through this petition that's come up. Such a device would slow them down considerably and encourage them to move elsewhere, and thus not disturb the residents each Saturday night. No wonder we haven't had noise at Scarborough. Sorry,
Councillors, are there any other petitions, unverified petitions you'd like to read out? If not, if I can have a mover and a seconder for those. I'm assuming Councillor Farrelly will move that. Councillor Kristovich will second that we accept those petitions. So just a show of hands, councillors. to accept those. That's unanimous. Thank you. Item 6, responses to previous questions from members of the public taken on notice. And those public question time responses from the last council meeting were published in the minutes of that meeting. Brings us to item 7, public question time. So we'll move on to those. And we have some recorded here. Thank you for those members who were able to send those through earlier. It does assist officers in providing more detailed responses. But I will ask to start with Charlotte Smart-Kelly, if you'd like to come forward, please. Thank you. And if you can just start by pressing that button on the bottom right-hand corner so the red light comes on, and your name and suburb, and then your question. Thanks.
Name is Charlotte Smart-Kelly and I live in the suburb of Innaloo. I've got 3 questions for you tonight that I will bring up while I stall. So this is with regards to the local planning for the Stirling City Centre. And with specific regard to the station precinct and also the sub-precincts D, E and F, Stirling Cross, Ellen Stirling Boulevard and Innaloo, not in that order. Will there be a specific zoning provision for an increase in community and public health services, more specific than the mixed use?
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Rodich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Ms Kelly, for the question. Under the Stirling City Centre planning framework, permitted land uses in sub-precinct E and F of the station precinct include community purposes, medical centre, hospital and consulting rooms. As such, the planning framework can facilitate these uses, but it does not require increased community services and health facilities in these sub-precincts, but it definitely can facilitate those if they are proposed.
My main concern with that is that it's my understanding that Hesperia has bought one of the blocks at Stirling Cross, and I'm concerned that that will only be for private medical use, that is to say for private patients, and not for public patients, and therefore not for the benefit of the greater community.
Thank you. Yes. Your second question?
So back again on the topic of public health, would the city be open to lobbying to the state government for funding to develop more community health services, for example, upgrading or expanding the services at Osborne Hospital and improved public transport provisions to the hospital, such as a cat bus from Stirling Station to the hospital, a free cat bus?
Thank you. Mr. Quirk?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the question. Yes, the city does regularly lobby other levels of government where there are perceived or identified gaps in service delivery or infrastructure. However, it should be noted that the state government just recently completed a $24 million expansion of the Osborne Park Hospital, and the hospital is actually already serviced by a direct bus route that links it to the nearby Stirling train station.
I'm familiar with that bus route, the 427. During off-peak hours, I think it leaves Stirling every half hour or so. In my opinion, I don't think that's sufficient public transit from the station to the hospital, particularly for elderly or disabled members of the community.
Yeah. And your third question, please?
Okay. So I did bring this up at the EGM, and now that we're getting towards the end of June, when can we expect to see a more comprehensive homelessness action strategy plan?
Yeah, thank you. And look, as you probably followed it, recently, it was only in 2020, the city put forward its homelessness strategy, and it was, I guess, a starting point for this council going through to 2022. It's currently under review. It probably is noted, though, that any future strategy or action plan would focus primarily on advocacy and access to the information and service rather than direct service delivery by the city. But that's certainly under review and out for consultation shortly.
Do you think that's sufficient for a local government area that has the dubious distinction of having the highest number of homeless people as per the last census?
That will be determined in that process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Patricia Cole. And just your name and suburb to start, please.
Is this on?
Yes, it's already on.
Thank you. Patricia Cole, Davenport Street, Carrinup. I didn't realise actually that I had to remember my questions that I'd written down.
Oh, we can get them to you. If
But
you
I do remember, I do know what I said because it's on my mind every day, all day, every time I go to Carrinup Centre or walk the dog. Does the council realise how very difficult it is for someone with a bad back, not exactly paralysed, to cross the road when the traffic is so furious at all times of the day? Occasionally it slackens off, but then you have to make a run for it, and I'm no longer able to run. Also, I think that it would be a very good idea, and I don't know if the council agrees. Would they agree, perhaps, is it a possibility that we could have speed bumps especially? Because the traffic goes down there, especially when it's not so busy, at about 70 k's an hour, easily. And what was the third question? Oh yes, what worries me quite a lot is, do you think that anybody here is aware that should there be somebody hit and badly injured, or perhaps even a death caused by some car hitting them, who would be responsible for not trying to prevent such an occasion?
Sure, and thank you for sending those questions through earlier. Look, I can say, whilst I certainly can't say I understand how hard it is for yourself to cross the road, we are certainly aware of the issue and have been out there to meet with residents and aware of the petition also that's been presented this evening. I'll get Mr Rodich, who's been doing a bit of work in this area, to provide some information for you.
Thank you. I'm not alone, by the way.
Oh, we understand.
Thank you.
Oh, if you stay there, I'll just give you a response first, if you'd like. Yeah, Mr Rodich.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Ms Cole, for the questions. The City has engaged an independent consultant to undertake a road safety audit of the surrounding roads around the shopping centre. We are currently reviewing the recommendations of that audit, and that will inform whether or not we need to carry out works along those roads to look at things like you talked about, access to the shopping centre, the speed, the controls around that. We are looking at that, and we will come back to the committee once we've reviewed that to determine what we can do. One thing we don't want to do is what you did put in your questions, is have people stand in the middle of the road and stop traffic to get across. We don't want you to get hurt, so we'll make sure that we look at those
I forgot
things.
to mention that again, but it did occur.
No
And
problem.
I think also 40 kilometres an hour would be a lot better than 70.
Yeah, and as the Director has said, it will all be considered as part of the review.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lynn Ames Springham, please. Just your name and suburb to start, thanks.
Lynn Ames Springham, and I live in Jundanna. Good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors, staff and gallery. I have 3 questions this evening. Question number 1. In a meeting with the Director of Infrastructure and Manager of Parks and Sustainability last February, it was established that not all trees removed from Mount Lawley Golf Club were physically assessed. How will more scrutiny be applied to future proposed tree removals, and what will be the process?
Thank you. Mr Kellick.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks for the question. Through you, Mr Mayor, I wanted to make clear there's currently a moratorium on tree removal at the Mount Lawley Golf Course, and the City will assess any proposal coming from the club along with the tree and vegetation management plan required under the lease. And the club is also clear that they need council approval to remove any trees, so there's a little bit to go on this process.
Thank you. My second question, will the newly appointed Parks and Sustainability Officer have any procedural directive to make councillors aware before approving tree removals?
Sure. Mr Kellick.
Thanks again for the question. Further to my previous answer, officers will report to council regarding any proposed course improvements and the impact on trees and bushland through the tree and vegetation management plan I've already mentioned over the golf course. And council, so a report will go to council, and council will determine the matter.
Thank you. And my last question, are council aware that a meeting will be held at the Mount Lawley Golf Club tomorrow evening to present a greens renovation plan, which also includes the removal of 34 trees? In recent years, the board have been clearing areas to put in grass walkways, to link fairways, and have removed trees. Just in the last few weeks, parts of the 15th Fairway have been dug up and replaced with a plant wasteland section. This is all in keeping with the look and feel of the new course master plan. It is being done by piecemeal. Slowly but surely, we are losing tree canopy. We know that 554 trees are targeted for removal. It seems apparent that the MLGC's board are pushing ahead with the tree removals on the A-class reserve. The board have acknowledged tree removals have been put on hold and yet are proposing 34 be removed at tomorrow night's meeting. Will Council continue to halt tree removals at MLGC, or will these trees be removed?
Thank you. Mr Kellick.
Thanks for that question. We are aware of the meeting that's being held this week, and note again that there's an existing moratorium on tree removal at the club. The club have developed a draft 3-year greens replacement program, as we understand it, and that's what's currently going through consultation. Will be the subject of the meeting this week with club members. So my understanding is that the club will finalise that program based on the feedback they get from members this week, and then submit it to council, submit it to the city for consideration by council, along with their revised tree and vegetation management plan.
A quick extra question. Are you aware that the greens are literally being enlarged and moved, and that's why they're wanting to take down the 34 trees?
Yes, so we're aware of the meeting, but in discussions with the club, there is a confirmation on the tree moratorium. And whilst there is in the total greens renovations and plans a plan for future tree removal, it certainly won't be in the near future before council sees any of it.
Thank you.
Matthew Chow.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Matthew Chow. I'm from Blackburn, representing the applicant of the viewing tower. Blackburn's based in West Perth. I've got 3 questions tonight. One of them, firstly, is the council aware that the application being sought for the viewing tower is not only temporary, but likely to be on site for less than the 12 months allowed for under the development approval? The reason being it takes 1 to 2 months to get a building permit to erect it, and then when the DA expires, another month to take it down. So in reality, closer to 9 months.
Yes, Mr Chair, thank you. That was in the report that it's a temporary viewing tower.
Thank you. Secondly, there was much discussion about this piece last week, but is the council aware that the city's planning officers not only recommend approval for this application, but are of the view that no other DA is necessary for the approval of the temporary viewing tower? Viewing towers are approved quite regularly in local authorities with no other DA in place, and that, in the officer's opinion, another development approval is not a relevant planning consideration.
Yes, that actually came up at committee, and council did discuss that and are aware.
Thank you. Thirdly, finally, is the council also aware that the temporary structure will require a building permit, meaning things such as the structural design, building compliance, things such as handrails and other code-related items will all be strictly assessed, along with a very strict operational plan, one which Blackburn have implemented several times, actually 5 times before in the last 5 years across other local authorities without a single safety incident or any other type of issue.
And thank you again for that question. And yes, that was discussed at length at committee, including no binoculars, I believe, Councillor Hatton.
Correct,
and,
no binoculars.
and was considered by council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Peter Ellis.
Peter Ellis, Corrine. Good evening, Mr Mayor, councillors, hard-working staff and fellow ratepayers. Can I acknowledge all the frontline staff in the council office and Balcatta and the park section who were most helpful in sorting out our new tree on the verge. Thank you.
Yes, you may. And noted. Thank you.
With the proposed widening of Taxel Close to enable, oh, my spelling's terrible, to enable a road race truck equipped with automatic transmission, power steering, reversing camera and buzzer, can you tell me how many times they need to reverse to turn round 180 degrees?
Oh. Can you, Mr Ellis?
Yes, I can, Mr Mayor, but I ain't helping.
Mr Ellis, you're like the Triple C. You know the answer before you ask the question.
Of course, Mr Mayor. Goodness me. May I refer to the answer in question 1, Council meeting of the 12th of May 2020, which states, as at the 31st of March 2020, the City had 782 full-time employees and 202 part-time employees. So can you tell me when you hired an extra 416 employees to bring the head count to 1,400 employees?
Thank you. Ms Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Mr Ellis. I guess in terms of that, there's two different numbers. So that 900 is the FTE, whereas the head count is the actual people, the number of people that we have in place. So we have job shares, we have a number of roles where there are multiple people. So that's the difference between the two. It's not an additional 400 people, or not additional 400 FTE.
Okay, thank you. Next one is going to be one of those. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Ellis. Simon Wheeler.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors,
Mr. Wheeler.
and staff and members of the public. Mayor Owen, Mr Rodich, the Director of Planning, was quoted last year in relation to the Caranet West DAP approval, saying that the height and bulk and scale of the development was not compatible with its setting and would have a significant negative impact on the amenity of the community. Now, item, I think it's 12 point something DS2 on tonight's agenda notes that the proposed viewing tower will assist in the sale of the residential apartments planned for the site, and that it is for the sole purpose of marketing the approved development, even though that development isn't going to be built. If the proposed viewing tower is to support the incompatible development that Mr Rodich and yourself, Mayor Owen, so eloquently condemned, it seems illogical for the report to state in DS2 that the proposed height is appropriate to its site and context. So my question is, Mayor Owen, do councillors consider that approving this item would be highly prejudicial to any future non-conforming development DAP applications on this site, and that by supporting this item they'll be essentially throwing in the towel on any future attempts to uphold the local planning scheme number 3, the local planning strategy, or indeed the amenity of Caranet residents?
Thank you, Mr Wheeler. I'll get Mr Rodich to provide comment, and obviously councillors will make that determination this evening.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Mr Wheeler, for your question. The Council's decision tonight will not prejudice any current or future development application on the site, as all applications are assessed on their own merits against the relevant planning framework.
Thank you. Mayor Owen, at the last council meeting, council voted behind closed doors to extend the contract of the CEO, who has been CEO since 2007. At the recent EGM, in answers to questions, Mayor Owen, you stated that in the event of a contract extension, that the position of the CEO would have to be advertised. My question is, did the City receive independent legal advice that supports the proposition that the CEO's contract could be extended without being subject to an advertised recruitment and selection process?
Thank you. Mr Blanchard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The City did receive independent legal advice.
Thank you. Then I'm confused because Clause 13 of Schedule 2 of the Local Government Administration Regulations, 1996, requires that after 10 years in the position, a CEO who wishes to continue in that position, invited or otherwise, must be part of an advertised recruitment and selection process prior to the expiry of the contract. And I'm unsure how the elected council could vote to extend the contract given the recruitment and selection process has not, as far as I'm aware, been undertaken. Will the City confirm if councillors were made specifically aware of the provisions of Clause 13 of Schedule 2 of the Local Government Administration Act 1996 prior to voting on that item?
Yes, I can confirm that all councillors were provided that information, and the independent legal information was also provided to councillors, and councillors sought to extend the contract of Mr Jardine for a further year due to several factors, some including bringing on board a new director and still going through probably what I would call the leftover effects of COVID, and sort of as a real benefit to keep Mr Jardine's experience here longer.
It's suggested that those override the regulations, is it?
No, well, you can take that up with the lawyers, Mr Wheeler.
Thank you.
Roland Hadley.
Good evening all. Roland Hadley, Woodlands.
Evening.
On behalf of the Ewan Street Community Group, we have concerns over item 14.1, the illumination of the main admin centre to celebrate significant events or occasions. As major events will be covered through the media, press, TV, internet, etc., we doubt if many of the 220,000 ratepayers passing the premises will say, "Oh look, coloured lights, we must go in there." Therefore, to save ratepayers money, we suggest that this proposal be rejected and councillors of the same mind.
Thank you for that, and that's an item that is on the agenda this evening, and council will make a determination on that.
Good, thank you. Item 2, relating to item 13.6 tonight, indicates a conference in Austin, Texas in early August. Another annual junket for the CEO at a cost of $7,253. As the CEO, known for his longevity in local government, has surely accumulated sufficient knowledge and experience in all matters. Does he require any further professional training? The conference may be live streamed and copies of papers presented will be available on the internet. Perhaps this $7,253 could be spent elsewhere.
Thank you for that comment, Mr. Hadley. I'm quite comfortable that I actually impart my knowledge on the CEO on a regular basis. He's always open to learning, but I'd also like to think that he'll be able to impart some of that knowledge on those other mayors and representatives at that local government conference as well. I'm quite comfortable that it's under his contract, and council will make that determination this evening.
Thank you. Question 3. Item 17 of the agenda on the 24th of May included 3 matters that were to be held behind closed doors. Whilst the title of 2 items provided an overview which is acceptable, 17.3 was titled simply Confidential Contractual Matter, giving absolutely no indication as to what the matter referred to, which we find concerning. Did this relate to the construction of 2 spas adjacent to the staff room, or conversely, was another metal folly joining Lena outside? If, however, it was related to the extension of the CEO's contract, why was this hidden from the ratepayers and simply titled CEO's contract? Could you now advise if this was the subject of item 17.3?
Thank you for that question. I want to know how you knew about my 2 hot tubs, Mr. Hadley.
Well, it was mentioned one was initially the...
Mr. Hadley, it was that is how it is in the agenda. One of the main roles of a council is to be elected to deal solely with the CEO's hiring and firing and their performance. So it's entirely appropriate that that contract is under confidential cover. It is now out in the public and there is no secrets.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Penny Brown, thank you.
Good evening.
Oh, sorry, and just before you start, apologies, I do have to, we've just gone to 7 o'clock, so I do have to rule to extend public question time to allow further questions. Now you may start. So just your name and suburb.
Penny Brown, Wembley Downs. It's in regards to redevelopment notifications. That's one of my first questions. I was down Leach Street recently and there's a new redevelopment notification opportunity for another 2-storey childcare centre. And why did this redevelopment opportunity get the public notification of signage outside where the one on Hale Road did not? When you look at it, you've got the location of the Hale Road, Wembley Downs, under construction now, and that going forward with the one for Leach Street, if that goes ahead, that will make 7 childcare centres in 2 suburbs. Under a 5-kilometre radius.
Sure. So that what I will do. So the number of childcare isn't a consideration of this council, but I will get Ms. Shears to comment on the advertising for you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the advertising for that particular application in Lee Street is under our new policy. So our advertising policy was changed. At the time the Wembley Downs application came through, it didn't require that extensive advertising.
Yeah, prior to this recent change, signage used to go up all the time for the redevelopment opportunities. So obviously...
So I'll get clarification on that, just so...
Through you, Mr Mayor, there was a change in the regulations, so you're correct. There was signage on applications such as this. The regulations changed, which meant that that became the document the city had to abide by until we amended our policy. So we've only just recently amended the policy, so now going forward we do require advertising for those types of applications.
Okay, yeah, and as I said, it'll be the 7th one if it goes to being a childcare centre in 2 suburbs.
Thank you. And your next question?
Okay. Okay. In regards to the Hale Road redevelopment of the childcare centre, a hearing to applications submitted. I have here the application showing where the trees were to be retained. Not one of those trees have been retained. The whole site has been completely cleared. So what's to stop them from going, okay, we've got the fully cleared site, let's just extend this little bit here, a little bit here? What other parts of contract adherence will be renegotiated and put on hold, or decide, oh, well, we'll give you the leeway, you've already built it? That's not acceptable.
Let me get you an answer. Ms Hughes?
Through you, Mr Mayor, you're correct. The applicant's plan had some trees identified as retention. From memory, I think that was only the verge tree, though.
There was 3.
Through you, Mr Mayor, on the property or in the verge?
On the property.
I'll check the plans and get back to you on that. So the city doesn't have any power to control what clearing goes on a private site. If they are nominated for retention as part of an application, then obviously the condition will go on to ensure that they are retained through that process. So we can have a look at that further for you.
Now that they've gone.
Thanks, Ms Brown. And your third question?
The general road safety in regards to this redevelopment, as of yesterday, I have here, where there was already a near miss as one car turned off Hale Road onto Unwin, where the big truck was parked literally right off the edge of Hale Road and Unwin to the point where it could unload its bricks. You could not see around it safely. There was one car come down Unwin Ave, almost into another car, because there was no visibility and no safety with the way the truck was parked. I also have the photo here. So there's going to be major problems with this redevelopment going ahead. That is a narrow street.
Thank you for that. And look, all I can say is, you know, there are 2 very different issues in terms of traffic safety around a future development and a construction phase. If there are issues during the construction phase, though, we're happy to get those details off you and follow up with our building compliance area.
I believe the parking ranges were called, but also this is right at the school crossing where the flagmen go. So, and that part of the footpath is closed now.
Thank you. And our community safety I've just been informed our community safety have been out there and will deal with that. Lynn Nowak, I'm not sure if she's arrived. Yeah, Mr Wheeler?
Mayor, I mean, Lynn's not here. I mean, I think you have a questions. I can read them out if you want. They're really quick.
Yeah, I am happy for you. She has sent them through, so I'm happy for you to read them out, Mr Wheeler.
Okay, sorry. I can't do it in Lynn's style, though.
I'd like to see you try, though, Mr Wheeler.
Well, these are my questions. Over the last few weeks, what consideration has been given to traffic calming measures around the Karrinyup Shopping Centre?
Mr Rodich?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Ms Nowak. The city has engaged an independent consultant to undertake a road safety audit, and we are reviewing the recommendations of that audit. This may inform the need or justification for any future works along these roads. The city is willing to consider any traffic calming measures on affected roads, but as you can appreciate, all measures would still need to be considered and justified in accordance with Council's traffic management warrants policy as per request for measures on all other city roads.
Thank you. And number 2, I understand...
Hang on, I just want to say this. Ms Noack, your second question. This is
Right.
this is too good to miss.
I should have prepared for this, shouldn't I? Second question. I understood the locals would be sent a letter regarding this to be received over the last 3 weeks. I've not seen such a letter. When will this come?
Thank you. Mr Rodich.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Once we've considered that road safety audit and the recommendations, the city will write to the local residents in and around the shopping centre to, I guess, discuss or display what we may or may not do in the area. So, look, we're looking at the recommendations and we'll come back to the community. We understand the community are waiting for something to be done. But as I've said in my previous answer, we have to take these through a process, and the process starts with looking at those findings of that road safety audit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That is all I have on my list who are present this evening. If I've missed anyone, if you can just raise your hand, so I know. Otherwise, that does bring us to the end. There were several other questions who indicated that they'd like them on record, but aren't in attendance this evening. So those full questions and their answers will form part of the minutes of this meeting, so they're on record. Item 8, applications for leave of absence. I've received a request for a leave of absence for this evening's meeting for 14th of June 2022 from Councillor Andrea Criado. Are there any other requests for leave of absence, councillors? If not, can I have a mover and a seconder for that? Move Councillor Sargent, seconded Councillor Thornton, and just a show of hands just to do that if we can, and that is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Item 9, confirmation of minutes. Can I please have a mover and a seconder to accept the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on the 24th of May 2022? Move Councillor Perkoff, seconded Councillor Hatton, and a show of hands. All those in favour, please, councillors. That is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Item 10, announcements by the presiding member. I have nil. Item 11, unresolved business from previous meetings. I have nil. And item 12, reports and recommendations of committees. We'll now move on to the CEO Performance Review Committee item. Can I please have a mover and a seconder for item 12.1, CEO 9.1, please, councillors? Move Councillor Migdale, seconded Councillor Kristovich. Is there anyone opposed? If not, I will put that item. All those in favour, please, councillors. Thank you. And against? That is all councillors for. Councillor Ree is voting against that item. That is carried. Members of the gallery, that was the CEO Performance Review Committee. It was just the terms of reference. It was about adopting the consultant who does the review of the CEO's performance and the terms of reference for that review. That was a simple procedural. We'll now move on to the Planning and Development Committee items. Any alternative recommendations provided to governance will be included in your running sheet tonight. Councillors, do you wish to pull any other items out? Councillor Migdale.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just making sure that 12.2 DS1 is being pulled out.
Thank you. Yep. Councillor Thornton.
Yes, I'd like to pull out item 12.2 CF1, please.
Sure. Councillor Farrell, do you have an indication?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I might be wrong, but has DS1 been called out?
DS1 is to be pulled out anyway,
fine.
Yes. Councillor Ree.
Thank you. May I please call out 12.2 DS4, please, on page 167?
Sure. And if I could please have 12.2 8.1 pulled out, understanding it has to go to the confidential. If there's no other indications, councillors, I will start with item 12.2 DS1. That's lot 256, house number 249, West Coast Drive, North Beach, proposed small bar. Councillor Migdale is chair of that committee.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move the alternative recommendation, please, for this item, if we could have that up on the board.
Sure.
Yes, that council refers consideration of this item, proposed small bar, to a future Planning and Development Committee meeting.
Thank you. And that was part of a white paper that council received with that. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Farrelly. And that is a procedural to refer it. So I will now put that motion. If you can go to your formal voting now. So let's start practicing with the electronics. There you go. I know, this is going to take a little bit. Councillor Kristovich and Lagan and Farrelly, please. Thank you, and that is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. The next one that's been asked to be pulled out is item 12.2 DS4. It's amendments to Local Planning Policy 67, Parking and Access. Councillor Mcdale, as Chair of the Committee, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that, councillors? Seconded, Councillor Kristovich. Councillor Ree, you've indicated you wanted it pulled out. Have you just got a question, or would you like to oppose it and debate?
Well, Mr Mayor, I'd like to oppose it because I don't believe that it addresses...
That'll do for now then.
Okay.
That's right. So I'll go to Councillor Mcdale, if you'd like to open debate.
I'll reserve. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Kristovich? Happy? Councillor Ree, now you get your go.
Thank you. I don't think it... I've made the comment before, but I am concerned about these childcare centres. And while this is not totally addressed, I actually think it should have been addressed in there, and some comments made in here with regard to the public advertising. Because when we're putting childcare centres in, it's the neighbourhood that gets affected. I mean, I'll give you a classic one, the one on Ewan Street, one of the two on Ewan Street, although the other one didn't come to fruition. 6 parking bays are on the north side. That development's never gone ahead, so they've never parked there. So people park in Hakea, in an adjoining road, and walk up the laneway to drop their kids off. The same with League Street, the same with other places. And you've got the comment about Unwin today. People park their cars there to take their kids over to Hale. What's going to happen when people park their cars there to go on public transport, which is one of the problems with League Street? We've already got an oversized development in League Street as it is, where we've got parking in Willow Road behind, all on the verges of League Street, because there's a huge development which is only allowed 1 parking. I look at Innaloo, there's lots of ones all over the city. I think that in this particular parking and access policy that went out, that we actually should be addressing that, because that's one of our biggest problems, is the rat running and people leaving cars. So my point is, I don't think it has enough detail in here to show that the city is addressing it, and I would prefer to have comments in there rather than people come up with, well, we're going to sit there and make it out of it ourselves instead of us leading, this is what we're going to do. So I don't know whether it's possible to have a section in there or something, or we just allow people to vent their fun of the parking and they've already got.
So let me get Mr Rodich to give you some comments around that.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillor Ree, so this is going out for advertising, so it hasn't gone out yet. There's no recommended changes to the car parking requirements for childcare premises. Now, when it goes out, there may be some suggestions or recommendations from the public or the industry that there should be. So we'll take those into consideration. But in terms of an impact of a development, that's considered as part of the assessment. The numbers are one thing in terms of parking numbers, but in terms of parking management on site and traffic impacts, that is another consideration in the assessment.
Councillor?
Mr Mayor, I'm quite aware that that's part of the assessment, but unfortunately people don't live there and having to be subjected to it. I shouldn't have had to be subjected. The fact that you can get an approval for a childcare centre of which you have parking and the parking doesn't exist, that concerns me. I look at the Woodlands Shopping Centre where Cafe Z, which was 2005, did they build the restaurant with, they only were operating from 11 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night, no alcohol, 50 chairs. Now, with 3 sheets, it's all over the place, no additional car parking, which is now driving people crazy. And really, it should be classified as a small bar because it's definitely not a cafe. So I think when you look at some of these small centres, which we want to give an extra life to, we're not addressing the parking, we're not addressing what the impact it has on the surrounding suburbs, and particularly we're not addressing the waste management. And I know that doesn't come into it, but when you have garbage trucks parking there, it does. But one of the other issues is that people going on public transport are now parking in some of these places all day. Now, I mean, our rangers would have to, you know, be out there every 5 seconds all over the place. So I think we need to assess it a little bit better. And I would have thought in the policy that went out to the public, we would have actually mentioned some of these things. But I do take on board Mr Roddick's comment, and I really hope the 220,000 ratepayers actually do write to you.
So do I. Councillors, are there anyone else who'd like to speak on this? If not, yes, Councillor Farrelly.
Look, it's really a question. I know I probably should have asked it before, but in regard to the cash in lieu payments for parking, page 171 of the agenda, are we saying that the cash in lieu is not the preferred option in situations where there's not available parking within where we know exactly where the money's going to be spent? Could you just sort of give more information
it's stronger
on
than that. I think it's legislated that we can't collect it. But Mr Roddick.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Councillor Farrelly. Under the planning regulations, there were changes last year in July that require local governments to prepare a parking plan for areas and I guess for management of parking in their jurisdictions. And this plan must identify options to use cash in lieu for public parking. Therefore, it has been legislated that you should not ask for you cannot ask for cash in lieu for parking if you didn't have that parking plan. Now, those regulations do have a transition period of 2 years, where under your existing planning framework, you have provisions in your scheme which Stirling do have for cash in lieu. So you could still, but as part of reviewing this policy, as we know, those provisions that transition period comes to an end next July. It was opportune time to remove that from this policy. And in terms of cash in lieu, we only take cash in lieu in the past where we know we can provide those bays, or that I think it's determined that it's deemed transport infrastructure under the scheme, and that includes, it could be parking on the street, it could be public fee paying stations, it could be wayfinding signage, these types of measures. So we could ask for that as part of cash in lieu, but it's really if it's needed. And if you look at probably the developments over the last 2 years, I haven't seen an instance where we've charged someone cash in lieu for parking.
You happy with that, Councillor? Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? If not, Councillor Migdale, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And just to clarify, first of all, I'd like to thank all councillors for giving their input on this item, which was robustly debated at committee and unanimously supported. Again, I'd just like to remind you all, as was discussed, that parking at places of worship, small bars, taverns, consulting rooms, medical centres and in fact childcare premises will not change. So pardon me?
That's all right. Keep going.
It will not be reduced. The main changes, as per our agenda, as were discussed, are removing on-site car parking concessions where a reduction is not appropriate, grouping similar land use requirements for ease of use, adding car parking ratios for 3 district centres, which I believe you would all support wholeheartedly, and removing the cash in lieu as per what our director has shared with us. I do believe the right thing to do is to support this. The robust debate has taken place and I hope you all get behind it. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Migdale. And with that move, Councillor Migdale, seconded Councillor Kristovich. I will put that to the vote. If you can go to your electronic voting once again, councillors. Thank you, and that is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. I'll now go to item 12.2 CF1. There's an alt-rec from Councillor Thornton that's been pulled out. Preparation of local planning policy 2.12 affordable housing. Councillor Migdale, as chair of the committee, would you like to move a motion?
I would, but for the purpose of debate, I will defer to Councillor Thornton to move her alt-rec.
I think, yeah, I do think you should see if it's a significantly different motion. I'm not comfortable going to the it to the opposite motion, if this is the same motion, the alt-rec, I haven't seen the alt-rec, sorry, but is the alt-rec the one you debated at committee?
Yes, pretty much so.
Yeah, then in that case, it was defeated at committee, so I think you should put forward the committee's recommendation and then debate against that, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, in which case I would like to move the committee's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Lagan, thank you. And Councillor Thornton is opposed. And I will go to you, Councillor Migdale, to open.
I'll reserve, thanks.
Can I ask a question on this?
Just a procedural one, is it?
Yes, it is.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, because there does seem to be a difference here to other times when we have had a recommendation from committee and then the...
Right, so I'll answer that. So I know exactly what you're asking.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's entirely up to the chair, how they, or the presiding member, how they preside over a meeting. But this council, in general, has the view that if something is debated at committee, the chair of the committee puts forward the committee recommendation. That's the purpose of having the committee. I'm aware of Councillor Thornton's alternative being the opposite. It was a completely different motion a significantly different motion that was debated and it was defeated at committee. And I'm happy to hear the debate again, but it's not like it's a small amendment, and that's the difference. So if there's a discussion and it's a small amendment, then I'm happy to defer to that. So,
actually,
Councillor, it doesn't matter. So I've ruled on it. Let's get on with the debate. Councillor Lagan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm supporting the officer's recommendation, as I did at committee, because as in the conclusion in the report, it talks about the two planning areas that would be the first two that we would look at within the city. And I think that's a fair way to start. I don't think we need to move citywide as yet. The report does talk about on page 217 some figures from 2016 census that talk about identified 520 people were experiencing homelessness in the city. That's interesting because I'm looking at a Department of Housing and Communities paper written by the University of Western Australia titled Homelessness in Western Australia, a review of the research and statistical evidence. In the same year, 2016, the rate of homelessness in this report is 38 people per 10,000. So our figure here is incredibly high and speaks either of a failure of state government agencies or other agencies to either house or look after the people that are homeless. I don't think the rate is that high, but it is split into two. We're talking about affordable housing and the ability for persons to purchase, and often in the current debate that's about first home buyers. And I note yesterday the debate in New South Wales was that Perrottet has discussed the possibility of dropping the tax on housing, the stamp duty tax, as a means of getting people into affordable housing because they don't have to pay the upfront figure. And I think our option here is to look at putting it out for advertising. Maybe the advertising will generate some discussion around those type of issues, getting rid of the taxes that are up front, which are an impediment for people trying to purchase housing. That's a state government issue, not a council issue, but it will affect council if council decides to do a policy that is citywide, and it is something we should be looking at. What I'm happy about with the officer's recommendation is that this is out for advertising. It allows that kind of feedback. It allows us to look at all other options. Yes, we do need to take into account homelessness, but also affordable housing. But I don't think, as I said in my opening, we need to do this citywide as yet. If we look at the planning imperatives that look at infill and growth within the city, the areas we're looking at first, as recommended by the officers, are the most suitable for us to put within this report. Maybe after the feedback we'll look at going citywide, but at the moment I'm comfortable with the recommendation as it is.
Thank you, Councillor Lagan. Councillor Thornton, over to you now.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to commend the officers for bringing this local planning policy to council. However, I think that we need to get it right, and it can be improved by looking at alternative areas. If you look at best practice principles, affordable housing should be integrated in the community, not just relegated to very specific small areas. Okay, so that's one thing that I think we need to address. Also, we need to look at the housing diversity as well. What we're offering is very limited in this local planning policy. We're only looking at high density when the WA state strategy says we need to look at medium and high density as well. So we're really limiting ourselves by option one, and I think my alternative offers that ability to look in other suitable areas, as was identified in the report. We did see that there were several other areas that were suitable for affordable housing. Now, the other thing I'm concerned about is...
And sorry, can I just stop you in that little
Yes.
break there? So, councillors, just be aware that, would you like to... No, stand up, that's all right. So, would you like to foreshadow your recommendation? Because it's not an alt rec now, it'll become a foreshadowed if the other one is lost.
Yes, I would like to foreshadow this
So that's
alternative,
noted. Okay, continue.
recommendation. The other thing I think we need to address, affordable housing, is that it's happening now. We've got vulnerable people that are only 1 or 2 paychecks away from being homeless. I recently heard a story of a woman becoming homeless because her landlord wouldn't accept another $25 a week, so she was kicked out on the street. Now, these 2 areas that have been identified, how far away are they? May I ask the officers to providing affordable housing, please?
Mr Rodich.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillor Thornton, that would be in the early stages of redevelopment. So, look, if you want me to put a number on in terms of years, I'd say probably at least 3 to 5 years before we see substantial development of the magnitude of what I'm talking about of, development which has 20 or more dwellings. Councillor?
Okay, so I think we need to really look at the timeliness of this also local planning policy, and there's areas already ready to go, okay, for affordable housing. Another point I want to make too is best practice principles for affordable housing say they should be located around high quality amenity. Now, we've got a blank canvas at the City of Stirling. That's wonderful. We can put in public open space and schools, but I want to focus on Glendalough Herdsman, around the train station there. I think there's a couple of problems. One of them is the chicken abattoir. So how are we going to address having this historically problematic, noxious industry that has not been able to contain their pollution on site, and we want to put our most vulnerable next to a chicken abattoir? The other aspect to this area too is this chicken abattoir is also identified as public open space. So if we're densifying areas, don't we need to also provide public open space for them? So I'm wondering how this is going to fit with the affordable and providing quality amenity as well. If we're relying on this particular lot to redevelop, however, rumour has it that they don't want to move, but we want to lump affordable housing there. Where's our public open space, and you're putting it near a noxious industry?
I'll get Mr Rodich to provide some comment on that.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillor Thornton, as I discussed at the committee, the officers were of the opinion that this is something new for local government, where we are essentially mandating developments with 20 or more dwellings to provide affordable housing. So we considered that we'd approach it in a manner where to look to our future growth areas, and this is identified in our local planning scheme, where it talks about objectives for future growth and housing diversity, as you've correctly pointed out. But in the scheme and the structure plans, where we have those growth areas, do talk to, providing housing diversity, and through that lens, we believe that affordable housing will be suitable for those areas. Now, you talk that those areas don't have an amenity now, but those areas are near train stations, fantastic public transport. So that's one of the principles you've discussed for where affordable housing should be located. Yes, the amenity, it may be not there now, but it will change over time. And when I did say that we might not see development for 3 to 5 years, we still may see plans now, and that's where you want to make sure that developments of the scale what this policy would consider do provide for that within their development. So we may not see that development, as I said, maybe 3 to 5 years, but that doesn't mean the DAs and the planning discussion on those developments doesn't come to us now, because those frameworks are live and operating, and yeah, we believe that, you know, that's the best way to, you know, let's start to, you know, this approach of, you know, mandating affordable housing through developments of 20 dwellings or more. Your points make sense in terms of, you know, it shouldn't just be 2 isolated areas, it should be integrated across the city. This is just a start. It's up to council to make that decision tonight if they want to go citywide straight away.
Councillor Thornton?
Yes, I do think we need to get it right and send it out. Okay, so we need to get it right first. Just on that point of amenity, I want to take us back again to the chicken abattoir, because what I've been told is that they don't want to move in 5 or 10 or 15 years. So this is what we've got to deal with
Councillor,
now.
you might just want to be careful just with where you're going with that, and just stay on, yeah, you're in the public realm, and I think you should just stay on this item. The point's taken,
but... It is relevant because it's part of the amenity of affordable housing, and that is also a best practice principle, Mr Mayor.
Yes.
The last point I want to make right now is that the option 2, or the citywide one, does better align with our policies. So our local planning scheme in there, our strategic focus of 5.2, we want to support housing, prioritise affordable housing in appropriate locations, okay, with high quality amenity. Also, what else? Pieces of paper. Yeah, so our local planning scheme, our local planning framework do identify affordable housing around high amenity. It uses the word high amenity, strong community. I'm just not seeing it yet with these 2 specific areas. I think we can improve it, we can make it better by casting the net further. And there's plenty, you know, activity corridors and activity centres that we can look at affordable housing.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Thornton. And I now have Councillor Reid, then I have Ferranti, and then Sargent.
Thank you. Whilst I agree that yes, across the city is important, I think from and coming back to best practice, I actually think we need to practice what we preach. In 2005, we commissioned the Sterling City Centre project of building 30,000 houses just behind us with the Herdsman Glendalough structure plan. I think it's about 15,000 people. So houses, 5. So, you know, the thing is we are putting those into the structure plans. Through politics, through whatever, they haven't come to fruition, and I do hope to be alive when the Sterling City Centre is at least partially done. But I think when we're looking at a lot of these projects, a lot of it is state government, particularly with regard to affordability, homelessness, etc. But before I go on, I'd like to ask the question. The councillors did a workshop the other day on affordability and homelessness. Yes, it was in a totally different directorate. I'm just wondering, does that directorate talk to this directorate about how councillors felt about how we were going with affordable housing and homelessness? Because that report doesn't come back to us.
Thank you. Mr Roddick?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Councillor. Absolutely, we talk to the other directorates, and as you know, our homelessness strategy talks about advocacy, and one of the best ways we can advocate is by formulating policy which would deal with the matter from our lens through local government.
I just think that the other day a lot of councillors came up with some really good ideas and that which are not in this little document. So I'm just wondering whether or not they'll be paralleled somewhere else, because somewhere it would have been good to have the ideas from the councillors brought about by their community, those that live locally in their community and how they felt, to come out for people to know that, you know, we are thinking about it from a local level.
So Councillor, just to be clear, there's some separate items there though, and the workshop is information that will come back to council, but it's not going to be included in advertising a local planning policy to the public. That's what this item is.
I know this is advertising that. What I'm saying is it's still an affordable housing strategy, and I think some things that were suggested could have been in the policy. That can be later reviewed. That's all I was going to say. There are some people with outside the staff that have got some good ideas. Anyway, I'll leave it at that one. With regard to also the local government minister, John Carey, said the other day that he would have a whole lot of money available for build to rent, to one way to address the affordable housing, the homelessness, etc. We have a lot of land within the Stirling Centre project. We can swap land, which we've done before. That, to me, would be a great opportunity with some of the land that we've got to actually do the build to rent while we've got that money coming in. So my question is, would that be considered as part of this little addressing this issue?
Mr Rodich.
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Reid, not through this policy, what the state government do to incentivise, and if it's tax relief or build to rent proposals, that's separate. We'll consider what we put through this policy that development over 20 dwellings provides at least 12% affordable housing through a number of options, and that the policy talks to that. You know, is it affordable housing rental? Is it an ownership partnership with you know, a foundation's housing, for instance? But it's separate to what the minister talked about the other day. These are all positive things for the state, but it is separate. One thing the minister did talk about is providing incentives and density incentives for affordable housing within a development, but the state have not determined what that looks like. And you know, through this policy, we're in front of a lot of local governments and even maybe the state in what we're doing.
Very true, and actually, well, I think we can marry them in together, and I think it's a great opportunity to put it on the table. Although, as I said before, I don't think we should be doing state government issues, but it is a great opportunity. A lot of local governments, those particularly still in the country, and they used to in the city, have property which they rent out to different people, whether it's staff, doctors, nurses, whatever. And I think it's another revenue stream that should be looked at. And affordable housing, whatever housing, it should be included in our
Point of order,
portfolio.
Mr Mayor.
I know where this is going, Councillor.
Yeah, look, we're
I don't
discussing advertising. We're not discussing other local councils in the country. Can we at least be on topic?
Councillor Reid, you are getting close to time as well, but can I just suggest, if you want to wrap up and talk specifically about this item, councillors, this is a very specific item about a planning policy, and you have a councillor who wants to debate whether it should go citywide, whereas the committee recommendation wasn't. I think that's what your debate should be on, is whether you support the alternative that's been put up or this one, not about homelessness strategies. They're bigger issues and they're not related to this item.
Well, I would have thought that if we're going to approve we prepare the draft local planning policy on affordable housing, means we're actually talking about the affordable housing policy, whether it goes in our backyard or outside of our backyard. That's what we're talking about, the policy. It's different to say whether it's citywide or it's not, and I agree, the foreshadowed motion. But if you recall, Mr Mayor, I did say right at the beginning that I thought...
I've forgotten.
I shall remind you, would you like me to repeat my whole statement? That I actually think, because they're brownfield sites, and I would like to live long enough for the Stirling City Centre to come to fruition. Do you remember that bit? Good. So I think that we've got this opportunity in our back door. I think that if this state government and the federal government are going to do what other governments haven't really done since actually 1955 when Stevenson was first done, I think it's a great opportunity to push these right now, and I think Herdsman Glendalough, the people around there deserve it, and they do deserve a proper park, and that's been on the agenda for probably before I was born as well. So I could go on.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrante.
And I would for Mr Lincoln.
Mr Mayor, I'm a little bit perplexed on this whole discussion. It's gone along different tangents. My question to the Director is, if my zoning is 12.5 single dwelling, how does this citywide approach affect that property?
And a question from the gated community. Mr Rodich?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillor Frayne, it only affect developments where there's 20 or more dwellings. Looking at your area in R12.5, I don't think there's a block large enough to have 20 or more dwellings.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Sorry, Mr Mayor and the Director. The further question is, how does this affect lifestyle villages and the application to that if it was citywide?
Mr Rodich?
Through Mr Mayor, I might deflect that to Mr Jack or Mr Henderson to talk to.
Thank you. Through the Mr Mayor, lifestyle villages and so on, they'd be classed more as a specific purpose housing accommodation. It's not, it wouldn't be an affordable component as such. So the affordable piece and the definition and the policy will talk to affordable home ownership, affordable rental or social housing. I think that goes to some of the questions earlier, particularly in terms of the affordable rental piece. Probably just touching on that element as well about the build to rent piece. That conversation earlier, build to rent is market rental. It's not an affordable rental piece unless there are very strict controls in place that would restrict the rent that can be charged for those particular owners. So a little bit off course, but the lifestyle village wouldn't be affected by this policy.
Happy?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, that obviously verifies my questions and that's why I'll be supporting the original officer's recommendation because we need to customise this.
Thank you. Councillor Sargent?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was a bit thrown off lifestyle villages. I don't think they'll ever be affordable to me. Moving on. I'm actually...
Point of order, Mr Mayor. He's not old enough to go.
Thanks, Councillor.
In 30 years, I might be.
Councillor Sargent.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am actually... I'm actually going to support the... Shouldn't have started with a joke. I'm actually going to support the alternative recommendation, Mr Mayor. I do agree with Councillor Thornton when she says we need to get this right. And if we go out and we pick a specific area, that's fine. But ultimately, we will eventually get to citywide. And I think we should start sooner rather than later. And I got a couple of trains of thought on that. And it's something Councillor Lagan said. Did 38 per 10,000? Homeless, was it? And Councillor Lagan referred that to the 520 in the 2016 census. Well, the current population of the City of Stirling is 223,000 people. 38 times 22, which is 836 in my calculations, says that the problem of homelessness is growing. Now, we're not here to talk about homelessness tonight, but the problem of affordable housing for people that are able to access it is also growing. And we don't have a solution to keep up with affordable housing. What sold me on the alternative recommendation is something Councillor Thornton said, where we shouldn't pick certain areas and just focus on that. I grew up in Belga, and one of the issues with the suburb of Belga was bad planning from the state government when it comes to affordable housing. Belga, to this day, has a stigma attached to it of not being a great place to live. Now, I go out there every day and I try and rebut that. But ultimately, when you get to a point where one suburb is 1/3 affordable housing, it's hard to get away from that stigma. There are other suburbs within the Perth metropolitan area, Armidale, Thornley, Gosnells, has the same stigma because they had the same state government philosophy behind them of let's just pull them all into one suburb and that'll do, right? That's what sold me on this one. That's my worry on this one. Whereas if we pick particular areas and concentrate on those areas, it could very well have an after effect in years to come that we didn't expect. So that's why I will support the alternate recommendation. I think we're just going to have to do the work in the future on affordable housing citywide. So why don't we start now? The way the policy is written, it's only when you can build 20 apartments that you've got to start looking at it. So there's a lot of what the City of Stirling will have to probably take out of consideration, like Councillor Franti has said. But ultimately, I think that it's something we should start now. It's something we should get on with now. And we need to remember this is going out to public advertising. So if we do citywide and we go out to public advertising citywide, it's actually going to be a good temperature check of where the community are on it and what the community have to say. Because the community generally will go, not in my backyard, or let's bring it on. And that's something I think this council needs to hear. Because if you go to Pacific areas, you're just going to hear from that Pacific community. And that'll be fine. I'm sure councillors around the board will go, well, it's not in my backyard, so I'm not going to worry about it. But homelessness and affordable housing is something that will be the biggest challenge for not only this council but Australia-wide going forward into the next decade. And we need to get on top of this, and citywide is the way to go.
Thanks, Councillor Sargent. I will get Mr Rodich would like to just provide a bit of comment, please.
Thanks, Mr Mayor and councillors. Just in terms of if the council did choose to go city-wide in terms of the application of the policy, it is for the purpose of public advertising, and then you could always, wind it back, shall I say, in terms of where you believe that should be applied or not through discussions. What you couldn't do would be to advertise it in just for the growth areas and then add other areas into it without going out to advertising again.
All right. I still have some other councillors if you'd still like to speak. Councillor Farrelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor, look, I actually can't agree with even the way this has been put forward, because I recall something the opposite was done about 2 or 3 months ago. So that is a procedural.
Councillor, let's get on with this.
Yeah,
Seriously.
all right. No, I'm not going to rate. Look, this is. But you can have a little chat to me later and give me a bit of a lesson on it, because I'd like to be able to do it too at times. But the real thing about this is, as we notice with Scarborough, it has. I read here it's got an MOU with Development WA. Therefore, this makes it one of the. It would be the first one off the block out of Osborne Park and Scarborough. Look, I'm very pleased to hear. Alongside me, Councillor Sargent's opinion. I recall when Doubleview had a number of, and Scarborough had a number of what we would call state housing areas, and they became quite a stigma on those people who were living there. And this is a state government initiative, and they made an initiative to allow those people to sell their blocks, and they then said we will integrate it within the suburbs so we don't lead to that stigma. It also was Mount Claremont. You might recall some fantastic houses on the top of the hill looking down to the new Mount Claremont. They were state housing as well. They have been also purchased by people and then on sold. You actually have the integration of affordable housing within suburbs that are not seen to be now part of that whole quagmire of people who can't afford housing have to rent state housing. The concern I have in particular for coastal and in particular for Scarborough is that it's actually going through a huge disruption at the moment. You may notice that there was something about the numbers of 20 plus stories, and I've lost it off the thing, in Scarborough was something like 15 builds of over 20 units or apartments compared to everything else that didn't have that. That must illustrate to you, in 34 years ago when we purchased in Scarborough, it was a 2-storey height limit. It was an R30 that it went into very quickly after that. It was R20. Now, the complacency of some of the members here who talk about, well, I have R12.5 or R20.
Councillor.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
You might just want to
I retract. I'm not. Look, I'm doing it as a motherhood thing.
I said yes.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. I don't appreciate that comment.
No.
And my apologies to you, Mr. Franti. No, but I really want to.
Councillor, let's stick to the item.
Yes. Okay. But the fact is, these are not brownfield sites. They are residential areas with amenity. If you're going to look at putting a whole lot of affordable housing in one particular small area, which the current Development WA Master Plan area is that really what the
That's not this item though, councillor.
Well, this item is that
This item is about the City of Stirling doing something in the City of Stirling.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about the City of Stirling doing across the city-wide approach, as has Councillor Sargent mentioned. I would not see this as where we're picking out a number of suburbs or a number of areas, and because the past historically we've got out of that, so we're returning back to something that historically 30, 40 years ago was really leading to a problem within those communities. Why are we going back to something like that? Make it citywide, give the option to people in the public. It's a community consultation process. Let them make a community opinion about it. Let's not curb their opportunity to do that. And let's not go back to something that was when I was a teenager 25 years ago. But let's not go back to something that was proven to be very difficult to overcome. I think Belga was one of the last ones which ended up with that consolidation of state housing. We don't need that anymore. Affordable housing should be across the board, citywide. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've got Councillor Kristovich next, and then I've got Councillor Prout.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, we've gone from social housing through to rent to affordable housing in this debate, and we've covered a whole range of areas. And I'm not going to focus on state government responsibilities predominantly, but what I will say is that what people need to understand is that for this to happen, you need developers to come along. They need to want to build something. So if you say to a developer, a bit like when you change the zoning for the entire city or large pockets of it, the developers focus on very few areas, and they don't necessarily go to where you want them to go. They go to where it's desirable for them to go, where they're going to make a profit, where they're going to, etc. So I think it's very important to do this selectively and carefully so that we're mapping exactly where we want this development to happen, because it meets all the criteria and ticks all the boxes in terms of the lifestyle, etc. And the other thing that people need to remember as well is, what does affordable housing actually mean? And a good example is in Corrine on Marmion Avenue there. They built that multi-storey apartments, etc. And I remember when they were building that, and I said to the minister at the time and the developers, I said, they were talking about affordable housing, and obviously the community wanted to know, does that mean social housing? What does it actually mean? And what they said to me is that, well, most of these apartments are going to sell for between $800,000 to $1 million. Now, we're going to build some one-bedroom ones, which are going to sell for $600,000, and that's your affordable housing. And I thought, well, how's that affordable? 600 grand. I said, so all affordable housing ultimately means is we're building something smaller. We're building something less.
Through the chair,
so that people are paying less. And so if we want to solve this problem and want to encourage affordable housing, we need to give these incentives in areas that the experts feel need this development, not open it up everywhere so that the developers can go where they like, which may not be where we want them to be. That's the critical part here. So we can always expand it later on, but we need to focus them, because there's plenty of examples where we haven't focused them and they've gone off and done their own things, and that's pretty much all I'll say.
Thank you. And I've got Councillor Prout.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just quickly on the foreshadowed, which I will be supporting, it shouldn't be citywide. We've got to take better suburbs out of that, because that's already covered with affordable housing.
Councillors.
Look, what we're talking about here, this motion is limiting it to 2 areas.
Councillors. Thanks.
Herdsman, Glendalough and the Stirling City Centre. They have got a growth all their own, and that's got lots of impetus. And it is going to be up to developers, etc., and it's got lots of good things about it. However, what we should be doing is opening up amenity, diversity.
Councillors, would you like to take a break for a little bit so we can get this debate out? Yeah, thanks. Councillor Prout.
We need amenity, diversity, choices of affordable housing, and we're going out to public comment to give value to that public comment. We need to go to have a wider choice out to a wider demographic of our various communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hatton.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, it's been a very wide debate. The first thing that I want to say is that this is not all about homelessness. Councillor Kristovich has mentioned that it's a broader debate. It's also about intergenerational, families moving in, their children moving into their parents. And if you talk about the strategies across the World Health Organisation and so forth, it fits that strategy tremendously for intergenerational. However, it does mention in this affordable housing about Key Start and a link up to Key Start. Can I, with the WA Housing State Government, can I ask the director or directors, what is the binding agreement with state government on people who purchase these places? Must they be Key Start people, or can they be anyone buying these properties?
I think I'm pointing to Mr. Jack. Is that right?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Current arrangements through the MOU with the Department of Communities are that the properties, for those particular properties that are acquired by the Department of Communities, then they have a relationship with the Key Start programme. So they basically on-sell 70% of the property. It's the shared equity arrangement through Key Start. So 70% of the property value is purchased by an eligible purchaser who, I think Key Start criteria will mean up to 100, an income level of up to 100,000 for a single, or 155, I think it is, for families or couples, can meet that eligibility criteria. Then they don't require, I think a 2% deposit is maximum. They don't need any mortgage insurance. It's all underpinned by the state in that regards. The state holds 30% of the equity, so it reduces the overall cost impact on the purchaser. And they also hold essentially a restrictive covenant on title, so it remains affordable in perpetuity.
Sorry, yeah, not to diminish what you're saying, but that's not exactly...
Just through the chair, Councillor.
Yeah, through. That's not exactly... I know most of those details, and I'm asking, can anyone who's not in that process go and buy these affordable housing development sites?
I'll answer that.
Mr.
Policy
Henderson
is requiring that housing sold at cost to an affordable housing provider. That would typically be the Department of Communities, but there are other affordable housing providers out there that could be agreed to. We've talked to the Department of Communities. They hope to take them. What they do with that is not defined, because it's saying it's making that available for the Department of Communities to purchase, and then they would determine whether they put it into their Key Start program or whatever other program it is. So we're not trying to control that. All we're saying is a certain amount is available.
So are you saying that it's not in the open market? Is that what you're saying? The understanding is there's not an open market to buy these? Mr. Henderson?
Well, that's correct. The issue is to make them available to an affordable housing provider at cost, and then exchange for increased development potential on their site when they do that.
Thanks. Through the chair, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for clarifying that. But I actually prefer option one. Not that I don't like option two. I think we need to be doing all that councillors brought up for option two. But it is difficult for people on low incomes to live in certain areas. It's difficult because the amenity is quite not there in certain areas. The premise of this is to allow developers to vary the build. You get a faster build, you get a cheaper build, and that's all good. But it says that uniquely these precincts will have a high level of amenity. Now, having a high level of amenity means the transport, means the shops and everything, but to have that, quite often, if you're going to build in certain areas, like the areas indicated over the last 5 years, 200 odd dwellings could have been built in certain areas in the last 5 years. People need to have money to go to certain areas and live in certain areas. Now, we've got the Glendalough precinct there, Hersman precinct, that is going to be... Density. Yeah, it's density specified by the government. We need to use it. It's going to be affordable. That area is going to be affordable to anyone who lives there. So I'm worried about what we're offering to people, who's going to be housed there. If it's a homeless person, fine, I don't have a problem with that. But they've got to be able to buy stuff in that area. I can't go and live in Dalkeith, Netherlands or Claremont, even on a teacher's wage. My quality of life would be diminished. I hope some councillors can understand that. So horses for courses, courses for horses. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. No, I won't go there. I'll now go to Councillor Migdale to close debate.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and thank you all councillors for your interesting input into this discussion. It really is an interesting one because blue sky dreaming in a perfect world, we could throw this out to the whole state and make the whole state part of this affordable housing plan. Let's not diminish the role that state government needs to play in the future. The reason why I support option 1, as I did at committee, is because these areas have been worked out internally by qualified directors and managers who understand that if we do not make it conducive to developers to come into these hubs, which need to fit certain criteria, to develop 20 plus units, then all bets are off. There's not going to be any affordable housing anyway, because nobody's going to bother. So certain suburbs, you will have read in the agenda, they are looking at losing...
Sorry, Councillor, just...
Sorry.
What's...
Look, I really do have to mention this. The officers didn't make a recommendation for 1 or 2. They offered council the discretion to choose.
Let's finish debate. I'm pretty sure officers did.
They did. Across the city, to look at implementing this and putting it out for public advertising, in my mind, we will actually end up being at option 1 anyway. Why would we arrive at that?
No, we can't. We would not necessarily be at option 1 anyway.
Sit down, Councillor. Councillors, sit down for a minute, please. Councillors, it is not okay to enter debate during the close of debate without me acknowledging you. Please don't do it. You had the respect while you had the floor and had your debate, and you've talked since then through everyone else's. Councillor Migdale, close debate.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Anyway, the feasibility studies have been conducted. When you have a look at how feasible it is for a developer to go in to a suburb like Mount Lawley and build 24 apartments and have a certain amount of those be affordable housing, the entire development isn't worth it to them because the return becomes lower for them. So what they'll do is either just build 19 apartments, in which case they don't have to do, they won't fit this anyway, or they won't bother doing that project and they'll look to do projects elsewhere where they can purchase the land at a lower cost, which is how we arrived at these hubs in the first place, because they looked at the value of land, they looked at how reasonable it would be and at how encouraging to developers to want to do it. We want to get traction in this program. Affordable housing is really important, but option 1 is a reasonable option that will see traction. No, not in Balga. You may note Balga is not included in this. Karrinyup, Scarborough, Dianella, they are areas that are prime for development of units to incorporate affordable housing. It makes sense, it's logical. This is a work in progress. What we speak of tonight will go out for public consultation. We can amend it when it comes back. This is somewhere to start that is reasonable, makes sense, and takes us a step forward to action, which is what we want to achieve. I hope you support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Migdale. And that closed debate. It is moved Councillor Migdale, seconded Councillor Lagan, noting that if this is lost, there's a motion on the table from Councillor Thornton. So I will put Councillor Migdale and Lagan's motion to start. All those who just cast your vote. I think I'm still waiting for Councillor Migdale. That is it. Councillors, motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to the balance of reports with the exception of 12.28.1, which has been pulled out and go to the confidential. So Councillor Migdale, would you like to move the balance of reports, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the balance of reports.
Thank you. Councillor Proud has seconded that. If you can go to the vote, please, councillors. And Councillor Ree. Thank you, councillors. And that is carried with Councillor Ree recording a vote against all reports. So members of the gallery, please be advised the remainder of the Planning and Development Committee recommendations have been adopted by exception resolution. So we'll now move on to direct to council items, starting with item 13.1, which is the review of delegated authority. On page 253, councillors, do I have a mover of a motion for this one? Councillor Farrelly. What are you moving, councillor?
Mr Mayor. Look, I'm moving the two proposed alt recs for item 13.1.
Well, you've got to choose which one you're moving, councillor.
The one A, B, C.
Is it with the new limits on it?
Yes.
Okay, so, yep. So if you can just read that out for us. So starting from that in accordance. So let's just pause and get it up on. Yep.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, off you go.
Okay, that in accordance with section 5.462 of the Local Government Act 1995, Council reviews its delegation to the Chief Executive Officer's Performance Review Committee and those delegations to the Chief Executive Officer, noting the following amendments: that the delegation for engagement consultants is reduced from $150,000 to $75,000. Sorry, $150,000 to $75,000. B, that the delegation for new contracts is reduced from $750,000 to $500,000. And C, where the cost of retaining legal advice on any single matter exceeds $50,000, including elected members, the matter is to be referred to council for direction. This condition excludes employee-related matters. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. And I do want to note that Councillor Farrelly did request this, and it has been reviewed by the directors, and the limits haven't been put so low that they become operationally hard to manage. So I'll say that before we get a seconder, and then we can get more advice perhaps from Ms Hawkins even. Councillor Migdale, you'd like to second? I'll second that with a question. Yeah, sure. Is there anyone opposed? Councillor Reid. So we'll go to you, Councillor Farrelly.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair and councillors. The concern, well, first of all, the manner in which the Mayor is leading the change on looking at delegations and the consolidation, as the CEO has mentioned, of grants, etc., we are actually becoming more responsible for what is occurring with the monies that are being used in in the city. This is one of the ones where we also need to be cognizant of, is that if we engage consultants, we need to have some level that is more realistic to the amount that would normally be for a consultation. It's been 150,000 is quite a large amount, as the delegation is reduced to 75,000, as that has been shown to be a medium of cost at the moment for those engagements. The other side of it is, in terms of contracts, 750,000 really does lead us to question if we need to have more awareness of what is being done within the city in terms of contracts. This is just putting a levelling in. 500,000 will give us a much greater understanding of what contracts are going through that are going to make a real difference to the costs that come through the city. In the final one, it's actually looking at elected members being supported in by the council, and we need to understand where that's occurring. And the council needs to be responsible as the body for elected members. So we're actually in this trying to make a greater responsibility thrown on council rather than the delegation to staff. We need to actually start to take more control of what is being spent, and we need to take more control of what is being done in terms of the council. So I would seek your indulgence and ask you to support this as probably a preliminary way to look at costs. Maybe we go back to that in another 12 to 18 months if we find it's necessary. But this is a start to it anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Migdale.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I think this notice of motion speaks for itself. It's logical and reasonable in my opinion. Probably I'd only add in a point D saying wherever possible, tier 2 and below providers only are to be considered from an ICT perspective. I do jest, but
okay.
Not really. But perhaps that's another notice moving forward. The only question that I have on this is for C, how do you know that the matter will exceed 50,000? I mean, you know, perhaps we could ask
Mr. Blanchard.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, there would be rare instances where the city would know in advance that legal costs would exceed $50,000, but where we got to the point where we had a cost estimate, because we do get cost estimates from firms indicating that we were going to exceed that amount, that would be the trigger for a report to council.
Excuse me, can I? Oh, sorry, because I've just realised that is different to what I had, and I've read from the board. Can I make an amendment? Sorry, Councillor Migdale.
Well, let's get this right because it's your motion.
Yeah, C is where the cost of obtaining legal advice on any single matter exceeds 50,000, the matter is to be referred to council for direction.
Yes.
Okay. This condition excludes employee relation matters.
That's written there, yes.
All legal matters relating to elected members must be reported to council regardless of the cost. And my apologies, Councillor Migdale, because
sorry, I wouldn't second that item.
Well, it means that then that becomes
Councillor...
that was up to Mr Mayor.
Yep, so that last sentence, though, all legal matters related to, one, I'm not sure if under the Act if it's allowed, but it's also not, that's not related to a delegation. So this is about delegations related to the amounts. That's a separate issue, but I'll get Mr Blanchard to provide some comment on that one.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, this is giving council the ability to drive the decisions around involvement in significant actions incurring large legal costs. It's not a delegation that relates to all legal matters, and there would certainly be instances where a report to council related to elected members would simply say, we have a confidential matter relating to elected members that we need to seek legal advice on. Can we seek legal advice?
Yeah, that's what you do.
Because we would not be able to disclose any of the details of the matter to council.
Thank you for that. And once again, I know Councillor Migdale is having problems. I would then say where the cost of obtaining legal advice...
So it's not up for debate. What we've got to determine is if you...
Point of clarification, I'm not having problems.
Let's just keep it cordial, hey? So right now, you've got something in red written there. All legal matters related to elected members must be reported to council regardless. You'll be given some advice. Do you want to leave that in your motion and see if someone will second this motion as it stands?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Is anyone... We might even treat this as an... Yeah, I'm trying to do it as an amendment.
As the seconder, I don't approve of this amendment.
All right, I'm just trying to stop starting all over again. Is there anyone who would like to second this motion? So you're not getting a second. Councillor Farrelly, listen. Councillor, you're not getting a seconder, so my suggestion to you is just to remove that item in red because you did have a seconder then, and then we can just continue. It's a simple way to do it. Otherwise, your motion lapses altogether. Councillor, you don't have a choice. Either your motion lapses and I'm going to put it, or you can remove that off it.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll let my motion lapse then because For me,
Okay,
it
so
was
this
a
motion, is there a
responsibility.
councillor who'd like to put a motion forward this evening? Councillor Mcdale.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to put the motion on the board forward, please, minus the red amendment.
Thanks. Thank you for keeping it simple. And is there a seconder for this motion? Councillor Ferranti. I'll now go to, assuming Councillor Ree is still opposed, then we'll go to Councillor Mcdale to continue on where you left off.
Can we just clarify? Councillor Ree is opposed, is that correct? Yes? Okay.
She was opposed to the balance of reports. I'm guessing she's opposed to this.
I don't think we need further conversation on this. It speaks for itself. It's very logical. The reason why I wouldn't accept the addition is because I don't feel that it is legally okay. That's all I have to say on this.
Thank you. And Councillor Ferranda, you seconded this one.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Look, it seems a fair and reasonable change, and we don't need to have another workshop on it.
Yep. Thank you. Councillor Ree, what are your issues with this item?
Mr Mayor, I'm very proud to sit there and say that I read this in detail.
I am aware of that.
On behalf of my community going forward, and I'm very proud to say that I sent you a copy of summarising of my thoughts.
Yes.
Of which you returned no comment.
So, I beg your pardon?
You haven't come back to me.
I'm pretty sure I spent about an hour on your information this morning and sent you through quite a detailed bit of information and sent it on to governance for a response as well.
Well, I don't think I've got it.
No, it was earlier today. Thank you.
Oh, my comments aren't, well, they weren't included into the motions anywhere.
Councillor, it's not my job to make your motions up. I can.
Oh, you just say no.
I'm just chairing this.
You
Continue.
just say
Let's.
no. Okay.
Let's continue.
Well, with regard to page 264, 266, 296, because these delegations are not numbered, they are just referenced on pages. One has qualifications that you have an authorised officer, another one doesn't have qualifications. I think if we're going to go fair, it should be uniform. Either you've got qualifications.
So let's do this one easily. Mr. Blanchard, is it possible to add under conditions a condition to say all suitably qualified? Well, it's exactly what you just asked, that they're suitably qualified.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Depending on the nature of the head of legislation under which the delegation is made, a delegation or an authorisation may be to an authorised officer of the city. In other circumstances, a qualified officer of the city, and in other circumstances, an authorised person who does not necessarily have to be an employee of the city. I can't give advice at the moment on the individual circumstances that apply to each of these authorisations, so I'd have to look at that offline.
Councillor Ree?
I'm confused. You said you sent it to governments and then they gave a reply back, so the comment made was then they haven't been. Okay, I won't go there. I don't want to use up my time. With regard to it, I'll give you an example. 264, authorised persons under the Building Act employed by the City of Stirling be authorised in writing. My concern is, which we've seen in various other things, that people that didn't have a qualification as a building inspector but were authorised to go and have a look at a building structure, which was then found out through SAT and everything else like that. So that's my point, that I think if we're going to Building Act, we should be qualified under the Building Act. So that's my point there of just tidying up all those qualifications. My second point is page 272, 273, 224, 275. One says that 273 says we'll tell elected members. Another one says we give a report to council. Another one says we don't tell anybody anything. I think that if we're doing a delegation, because this is the power of the city on behalf of the ratepayers to get things done, that any of those delegations should have a report back to council. So to me, not just elected members, which could go to I don't know where, but it should all come back to council. So I think one of the things that was said both in the Banking Royal Commission, where they said that if the board asks for a report, then the report should come back to the board. It shouldn't go to select people on the board and should be discussed by the board. The other thing is, under the comments made by the Minister Carey, when he talks about the reform and processes and procedures, he made the comment that when you do a process or a procedure, it should always come back to be sanctioned by the council or be reported back therein. So to me, I think that should also be streamlined, that it should be consistent. And this is mainly my point with these delegations, is consistency. When I look at page 274 with the leases, that needs to be uniformity, because I know for a fact, and I've mentioned it before, we have one sporting club in one suburb paying $1,500 a year to lease a building, our building. Another one's paying $15,000. We've got a disparity. So with the leases, having who can sign the leases, who's allowed to sign the leases, who can sit there and change the cost of the leases, we need some uniformity to people. And this was, and this issue of which I did ask for a meeting with all the sporting clubs, all the owners for our leasing last year, still waiting for that one, a bit like the Stirling City Centre. The page 277, consultants should be less than say 30K. I actually agree with those recommendations on the board, although I think B should be a lot lower. But 277, the purchase order should have a financial limit. Why are we saying that we're going to have the delegation reduced from 750 to 500, but when we look at the purchase orders, we don't have a financial limit? I find that not consistent with the rest of the document. If you're going to change this, you've got to change that so we're the same.
So just to be clear with purchase orders, they're not just a made-up amount. The council sees what projects and services we do each year. We have a very detailed budget process, and we approve those limits. We then have to allow the CEO through the staff at the City of Stirling to do business. They couldn't possibly, every time they raise a purchase order to buy something, come to us because they want a new photocopier or whatever. That's all.
That's a very interesting comment, but I think if we're buying
Thank
a
you, Councillor.
photocopier for 500,000, I would really question that photocopier.
No, you're talking about purchase.
No, that's what I'm talking about,
All right.
purchase orders. If we're going to sit there and have purchase orders for 750,000, I think that is a worry. We should have it at stabilised, because I agree with you. We don't want to know if they bought a photocopier, although we did have to put in the budget for the library to get a proper photocopier, but that was another story. But, you know, I think that the important thing is that the basic ones, no. But when we're having $750,000, I think that we need to rein in our purchase orders what we're purchasing. And yes, if it's part of a project, which is, as we know, we get updates of what's going on, and that actually comes through the monthly cost of things. So therefore, some of it is in there. But what I'm saying is it should have some sort of a limit like the rest. And it's like in the new contracts coming to council should actually be a lot less than that, because I look at some of the other things that went on, doesn't make any sense. And it should be, and that was the other thing, if it's matched with political donations and promises, and that is a concern. So if we're looking at in the contracts that we say we're going to build a brick wall because a member of parliament wants a brick wall wherever, yep, and they go and give us 100,000, we, the staff, match that 100,000. We don't know anything about it here, but it's nowhere in there because it's a new contract. So I think that needs to be tabled somewhere, and I've spoken to you about that
You're
before.
running out of time, Councillor, so you have to wrap it
I'm
up.
going as fast as I can, but I did read it in detail, and this is my summary. With the contract variations, they should come to council annually. And when I look at what happened at Korean, I look at some other issues with contract variations, I think that we need to be a bit more on the ball than what we've been previously. And then my last one I'll comment on is the procurement. I do believe I pushed for the procurement policy to address at least 5% city support locally, which I think should be more. But if we're going to have procurement in here, why aren't we putting that in the delegation so that they know who's ever
So it
delegated
is. This only mentions the procurement process. It doesn't, not the actual policy. But it's in the policy. It is in the policy there.
Yeah, I know, but it should actually be. I know it's in the policy because I put a motion to get it in the policy. What I'm saying is that it needs to be in this delegation so that whoever gets delegated may not be able to get the policy, especially if it's not on the website after the last 3 years. They would need to find it.
Just to clarify though, yes, you did raise that, and you were the driver in that. It is in the policy. I can tell you right now, there is 100% more chance that someone in procurement is going to read the policy rather than the delegation that the CEO gets. So this document is irrelevant in that process. I'd much rather they see the policy. But thank you for, no, you're out of time anyway.
I totally
So-
agree that should be in the policy. However, I think under the delegations,
know what
whoever
you're saying.
get delegated to needs to know we support locally. We don't support London or wherever.
They do, they have to follow the policy. Councillor Sargent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sometimes things have unintended consequences, and I just want to ask a few questions around the reductions on the board there and how those consequences might play out. So A is basically reducing it by half to $75,000. I'm assuming that anything that's over $75,000 will come to council. Is there an idea on how many more reports we will get on council?
Yes. Ms Hawkins?
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
It's
Mayor.
going to be the same for the next one too.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Sargent. Yeah, I mean, looking at the contracts that have, or consultancy, sorry, that have gone through in the past 3 years, we see a number under the 70,000, but it's generally around the capital programme, so the detail around that will come to council. I would think we're seeing maybe roughly another 10 possibly reports coming to council, depending on what's adopted through the budget process.
Okay.
And sorry, and just to clarify, some of those wouldn't necessarily even be another report. It would actually be linked in terms of, and when you talk about unintended consequences, it's about understanding if we're approving a plan or a framework or a project, this might actually be linked to that, so it gives it more transparency over that.
Yep, no worries. The question I have around C though, when it exceeds $50,000, my train of thought is waiting for council meetings sometimes isn't the most speediest way to go, and particularly when you're looking at legal issues and when it gets close to that $50,000 and we don't have another council meeting for 2 weeks and the officers are like, well, everything's on hold now, or there's court dates we need to achieve, but we've got to wait for a council meeting. You know, it's those unattended consequences. And this might be Mr. Blanchard, does the city foresee those types of consequences?
Yeah, Mr. Blanchard?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the last 4 years, the city's reduced its legal spend by 2/3, and for us to accumulate $50,000 on legal in one matter would take more than a month, and I have no problem with that limit being set where it's at.
So I guess the whole point of my questions is to just try and hash out if everyone in the room's comfortable with what's on the board there. From what I'm hearing, they are, so I'll go ahead and support the motion.
Thanks, Councillor, and that's all I have. Is Councillor Farrelly? Sorry, Councillor.
Yeah, look, the reason I raised the
sorry,
other,
I just want to
and
apologise,
I do have
Councillor
a
Lady,
question to ask to the lawyer, and it was in regard to C, which was that this condition excludes employee-related matters, and that's really what was in there. It's a slightly different way of written, which raised my concern that elected members were not covered in terms of, you know, how does that relate? When you say employee-related matters are excluded, does that mean there's another mechanism for them to utilise? And what is the limit for that?
Mr. Blanchard?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All employees of the City of Stirling, except for the CEO, are employed by the CEO. So there would be no reporting to council on those matters because it's for the CEO to manage as their employer. So that, I hope, clarifies that situation.
No, thank you very much. It actually does. So in regard to this, therefore, if elected members are looking at obtaining, well, what is it, the cost of obtaining legal advice on a single matter if the city is doing it, I mean, that is up to 50,000, then they're under that direction then, is that right? If an elected member is in a matter that's being referred by the city in regard to obtaining legal advice, it can go up to 50,000 before it comes to council, is that right?
Mr. Blanchard?
As soon as we had a cost estimate that indicated the cost of the matter would exceed $50,000, we will report that matter to council.
One further question is that means that if elected members are in that position, that there could be matters raised which never come to council if they don't get to that amount. Is that correct?
Mr Blanchard?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, I will now go to Councillor Lagan, and apologies, Councillor Lagan, I
That's all right.
accidentally crossed you out and I hadn't called your name.
The other debate was so interesting. It was good to hear all that. I'm a little confused, and I need, through you, Mr Mayor, just to the Manager of Governance. Point 1 reads that in accordance with Section 5462 of the Local Government Act, Council reviews its delegation to the Chief Executive Officer's Performance Review Committee. Why are we putting any... That's not what the Performance Review Committee's role is.
And those delegations of the Chief Executive. So this was both of those, I believe, Mr
But why
Blanchard.
can't we just take out Performance Review Committee and just put to the CEO? We're talking about delegations to the CEO.
And to the Chief Executive Officer. So it also talks about the delegation to the committee we sit on as council, the CEO Performance Committee, that the CEO is not involved in.
But aren't we actually talking about the CEO's KPIs, not about what the Performance Review Committee...
No, it had this report had the delegations to that committee in it at the first part of it as well.
So,
I'll get
Mr.
Mr.
Blanchard, is that correct?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report comes to council every year.
Yep.
Council has an obligation every 12 months to review its delegations to committees and its delegations to the CEO. We do that in the same report. So this review is signing off on the delegations to the CEO Performance Review Committee and the delegations to the Chief Executive Officer, and also making some amendments to the Chief Executive Officer delegations.
Yeah, so that just clarifies that there are matters within what is discussed at the Performance Review Committee. In relation to, and just to comment through you, Mr Mayor, I've been questioning the delegations ever since I came onto council a number of years ago, and they were lifted fairly constantly over the years. But in relation to B, I did my own search on other major councils in Western Australia, and most of the delegations were set at those high figures. And that's because operationally they need to have high enough figures to manage what they're trying to do. Keep in mind the city, we have contracts that might be between $6 and $20 million. So we deal in big sums. It makes that sum look small. I do agree with the 500,000, and I have mentioned this before, only because I believe it's a trigger, and there have been a number of occasions when we've given a contract, given a figure, gone through a tender process, and 6 to 10 weeks later, the item comes back to council seeking more funds. And we've made comment before about, shouldn't that have been dealt with in the tender? There should be rigour in the tender enough for us not to be going out for more funds on a tendered figure that's already been discussed at council. With that one there, with B, that the delegations for new contracts, can we add in and variations therein be reduced?
Let me just get clarification and see if there's a problem with that. There's no problem from this point of view. So if Councillor Migdale and Councillor Ferranti are happy with that addition, they're both nodding, so they're happy to accept that.
Thank you. And on point C, the legal advice exceeding over $50,000, obviously matters that pertain to employees are not in the operational purview of elected members, and employees are they're under their own employment contracts. It's not for us to step in on that. But legal matters relating to elected members, just through you to the Manager of Governance again, what is the standard local law and our practice at the city when we offer support to elected members with relation to legal matters?
Thank you. Mr Blanchard?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We offer support in a number of ways. Firstly, every councillor has my mobile phone number, and I'm happy to provide advice at almost any time. Secondly, we subscribe to the WALGA governance subscription service, which allows any elected member to contact WALGA and obtain free independent governance advice from them. The same service is offered for free from the department. If an elected member wishes to obtain their own independent legal advice, there is a legal representation for elected members policy, which sets out the circumstances in which those matters will be dealt with. Finally, the city also has an officers and directors insurance policy, which in very limited circumstances the insurer will cover the legal costs of the elected member minus the deductible which is paid by the city.
And just further to that, so Mr Blanchard, the only time that matter pertaining to an elected member would come to council is when that elected member seeks financial support?
Mr Blanchard?
The main reason we use external legal advice in relation to elected members is for independence. So we are not comfortable in some circumstances to use our own internal view of the world to advise elected members. So we go out and we get independent legal advice. Some examples that are not controversial where that has been done this year has been on the implications of the work health safety legislation for elected members, the Local Government Act review. We also use independent legal advice if we need to do an investigation of an allegation of serious misconduct against an elected member, and in those circumstances that matter would need to be dealt with confidentially.
And so what I'm just trying to tease out here is the elected member, essentially when they come seeking that assistance, for us to vote to support them, we need to know a reason why they're seeking that assistance?
Mr Blanchard?
This delegation relates to the city receiving legal advice in relation to elected members. If an elected member wants to seek legal assistance, it's not covered in this delegation. It's covered by the elected member's legal representation policy, which sets out the process and circumstances.
Does this change that in any way?
No.
Okay, fine. And just finally, Mr Mayor, through you, point A, the delegations for consultants. I think it is it's fair and timely for us to look at the limit there. 150,000 for consultants, which may pertain to an item we've already dealt with in planning or an item that's already been dealt with by the design review panel. I think it is fair for elected members to have some oversight when the cost is rising and we've already dealt with the matter. So I'm fairly supportive of most of what we're being presented.
Thank you. And that's all I have for this. I do want to just add in, I think it's really important to note that the councillors who were looking to remove these did put it through myself, and it has gone to directors, so it has been checked over to ensure there's no unintended consequences. Also remembering that this can be reviewed in a year's time, so if all of a sudden council will see the results of this, if all of a sudden you're thinking, geez, we're seeing a lot of amounts come to council to review and you think it's too many, then it can be reviewed in a year and changed again anyway. So with that, I will go to Councillor Meekdale if you'd like to close debate.
Nothing further, thank you.
Thanks, councillors, and I'll now put that, move Councillor Meekdale, second to Councillor Ferranti to the vote, please. Thank you, and that motion is carried with Councillor Ree and Councillor Farrelly voting against. Other councillors all voting for it. Thank you, councillors. That now brings us past 8:30. Can I request... I wasn't going to extend, I was going to request a break, but I promise you it can't wait. So, so I don't know if we need a mover in a second or if we can just adjourn, but I think I can just adjourn. So we just adjourn just for 5 minutes for a comfort break. Be back in 5 minutes, please, councillors. All right, councillors, if we can ask you to take your seat. That's gone well over 5 minutes.
Right, we've got a quorum.
Thank you for that. We have a quorum, so I'll ask you to take your seats, councillors. Thanks to those members of the gallery and those viewers at home who've indulged us with a short break. We'll now move back to the agenda and jump back where we left off at item 13.2, which is the Walga Annual General Meeting and Annual Conference. This is regarding the delegates for these meetings, and I will ask for a recommendation, please, from Council. Councillor Sargent.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm going to take a stab at this. On page 325, the delegates for Walga are yourself, Councillor Lagan, Elizabeth Ree and Felicity Farrelly. So I was going to say the first two names should be yourself, Mr Mayor, and Councillor Lagan as the chair, and the second, number 2, should be the other two, Councillor Elizabeth Reid and Councillor Farrelly.
Councillor Lagan, you second that? Yes?
I'm happy to support that, and I think that goes to what we used to do anyway. The only thing is, I just make it clear that if they are unable to attend, they're to advise people and not turn up, because it doesn't look good for the city when people are delegated.
And I will endorse that comment from that point of view, that I have quite often, and this isn't necessarily this particular councillor, but I've quite often been looking around to find out where our councillor is who is going to go to this. So can we just make sure that those councillors who have nominated, myself and Councillor Lagan obviously, do notify early so that the other two councillors can move forward. Is anyone opposed to those who'd like to go? This is open to a ballot if councillors would like to put their hat in the ring. Yeah. In that case, it is moved Councillor Sargent, seconded Councillor Lagan, so we'll go to the vote. And that is almost Councillor Ferrandi. Thank you. That is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Item 13.3, the elected members' entitlement policy. This is just some amendments relating to the SAT rulings. Do I have a mover of a motion? Councillor Lagan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll move the recommendation. I do have a question though.
Your Councillor Proud is seconded. Is there anyone opposed? No, I'll take your question.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor, I just wondered why the documentation needed to include all the information pertaining to the CEO. Was it just because that documentation was part of the tribunal documentation, or?
Yes, that's simply for that reason.
Second question, page 5 of that documentation talks about 15 times elected members' fees for the social club. What's that total cost? No, the donation is the donation separate to the 1,500, or that is the figure?
That is the figure, I believe. I'll get clarification for you. Yeah. Ms Hawkins?
Through the Mayor, yes, I think that is the figure.
Yes,
yeah.
that is the figure.
Yeah.
And my last question is the information pertaining to the CEO, is that pertaining to a CEO contract that is not quarantined and the new model, or is it a contract as currently in status for the City of Stirling?
Mr Blanchard.
That is for a new CEO, so that would be a determination that would apply to a new CEO, not a quarantined CEO.
Thank you.
Thank you. And is it questions? Yes.
In regard to the Naval Association, I think there was 1,000 given to them, and to the RSL events there's...
This isn't part of this. That's a separate...
Oh, is it? Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, jumped the queue.
No, so this is just about the elected member entitlements. There was only that there's something mentioned in there regarding the donations that automatically go through to the social. Councillor Ferrandi, your question?
Yeah, Mr Mayor, with the increase of fuel, I note that there is a kilometres allowance here, but we're close to $2 a litre these days.
Yeah, so the Salaries and Allowances Tribunal has put that up, but it is legislated, so it's not up to council. Councillor Farrelly, I apologise. There is something in there regarding the Naval Association in this one, so apologies. Mr Blanchard?
Yes, if you could answer that, please.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. The Naval Association gets an annual donation of $1,500 and the RSL sub-branches receive an annual donation of $2,000.
Yep.
I just wondered whether they could not get the same amount, because, you know, the Naval Association is of similar ilk in a way when you look at the naval officers, and my dad was actually a naval officer in the Second World War.
Sure. And
so, you know, I think it's fair enough to ask for the equal amount.
I think you'll find at the moment it probably is, it works out to that anyway. So currently the Naval Association they're the ones who are meeting at the City of Stirling, so they also get the added benefit of that on top of that. So they're doing, so they're doing quite all right out of the city. All right, so there's no one opposed to this. It is moved Councillor Lagan, seconded Councillor Proud. If we can go to the vote, please. Thanks, councillors. That is unanimous. Item 13.4, the Australian Local Government Association National General Assembly, City of Stirling motion. Could I have a mover of a motion, please? Councillor Ree, happy to move it. Councillor Migdale, seconded. Is there anyone opposed? No. And I will make a quick note just so people wonder where this has come from. So this, Walga were keen for local governments who are attending in strength to put forward motions. And in discussions, this one seemed particularly relevant to local governments like ourselves. So that, and obviously the impact of this is that local governments shouldn't be relying on an election cycle to be able to get decent funding for mitigating. It had been a bit of a let-off, so thank you, Councillor Reid, for picking it up, because it does have to get endorsed by Council for this Council to be able to move it at Alga. So move, Councillor Reid, seconded Councillor Migdale. I'll put that to the vote. Oh, sorry, question, Councillor Reid?
Have we done the delegates to talk on this, or is Welga itself going to talk on this in Canberra?
No, I believe any delegates who attend Alga can speak to it, but I've certainly submitted the motion intending to move it. Thanks. So we'll put this motion. If you can go to the vote, please. That is unanimous. Thank you. The reason the red one keeps coming up is every time it changes, it moves across on the screen, and I'm going too quick, so I keep hitting the red one. We've quickened them up too much. Item 13.5, the event sponsorship proposal. Councillor Farrelly, you have a motion?
An amendment to that, if I may, that the council approves sponsorship of 25,260 for the Jazz by the Beach Festival 2022, consisting of 20,000 cash and up to 5,260 in kind, and part two will remain the same.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Kristovich. Is there anyone opposed? Councillor, yep, question?
I'm just concerned about this being sprung on us, number one, because when we actually called for a whole lot for the others, we had them in a group. So I'm just cautious about that. But secondly, yes, it does follow the policy. But thirdly, my question is...
I do think, just through wording, and I know what you're saying, well, I don't really know what you're saying. It hasn't been sprung on council. We're actually notified several weeks ago that this had to come to council. Yeah, and then there's been several notes come from officers, and I know from the proponents to council, so there's certainly no surprise here.
I meant, Mr Mayor, it didn't go through committee like the previous ones usually do. That's my apologies for not using appropriate word. Following the process that it went to committee first, this did not do so. Therefore, I withdraw my comment sprung.
That's right. Yep, I just wanted to clarify.
Following procedure. Is that better?
That's better. Thanks.
I'd like to also just confirm that although this is all in Scarborough, but it's whether or not it conflicts with the Music Awards, because, you know, I'm looking at the funding. The citywide Music Awards was 30,000. That's why I'm a bit interested in that report, reading the Music Award report and this one, and this ends up 25.
So firstly, this one hasn't ended up 25 yet, but they're very different items. They're like, whilst they may be involved in music, they're completely different items, that's all. Just because they've got, this one plays music and the other one rewards music, they're completely different items. There's no relationship.
The Music Awards actually people playing music. You can't win an award if you stand there, Mr Mayor. You actually have to do something, air guitar, whatever. You actually have to play music to get an award. So it is about music being played across the city. And it's more than just about jazz.
Thanks.
So my question was whether or not this is going to conflict.
It doesn't. I've given you an answer. It doesn't conflict. They're completely separate items. I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll see you in the air guitar race.
Is there anyone opposed to this? Yeah, sure.
I just want to ask a question around the valuation process after the event, and then, because I understand this is going above the threshold of what we normally delegate onto these, and I just would like an evaluation, because there is a lot of events we'd love to sponsor, just keeping an eye on the budgets. That's all.
Mr. Quirk.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. this isn't above the level that we generally provide sponsorship for. The difference now with the change to the policy is that any sponsorship over $5,000 is coming through for council decision making. So it is important to note that we are reviewing all of our sponsorship policy agreements that sit with it, with a very much a focus on measuring outcomes. That was a really clear outcome from the debate on the community arts and events policy most recently from council.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question, or can I, with your indulgence, just, it's sort of a question, I'll just letting you know, I'll be voting against this, and it's not because I don't support the event, it's because recently I talked heavily about grants and about having more oversight and for these to come to council. And I warned about the unintended consequence that then when they do, that councillors, if they're in their own ward, just change the amount without taking any account of the due process that's gone through in selecting these. But so it's not a debate, I just want to make a comment so it doesn't look like I don't support this event. So I will, I'd never say that. So I will now put this to the vote. Thanks, councillors.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, but I did indicate that I wanted to just make a comment further to your comment. Can I make a comment, or are we voting already?
The vote has already started. I'm sorry, councillors, but I apologise. I didn't see your indication at all. Councillor Proud and Councillor Reid to vote. Councillor, that's it. And that motion is carried with the Grinch voting against. I'll now go on to item 13.6, the Alliance for Innovation Transforming Local Government Annual Conference in August on page 401. Do I have a mover of the motion, please, councillors? Councillor Migdale moved it, seconded Councillor Lagan. Is there anyone opposed? If not, I will put that. Thank you. And we got one more, councillor. Thank you. And that is unanimous. Thanks, councillors. Notices and motions for consideration, item 14.1. Councillor Stephanie Proud, your motion, which did seem to get a little bit of interest from the gallery this evening.
He read the agenda. That's good that he does.
Your motion?
That a report be presented...
Councillors, thanks.
That a report be presented to Council on opportunities and costs to install additional coloured lighting to the City's main administration building in order to celebrate significant events and occasions.
Councillor Sargent has indicated he's seconding that. Is there anyone opposed to this? Thank you. Quick question. Yep.
Yeah, Mr Mayor. Look, my question was I know we've done exterior lights before in the past with special recycling or whatever it is, and in that report, and if it's okay with the councillor, can we look at whether there's digital work we could do on the exterior of the building to promote certain things as an option in that mix?
Yeah, so it's more than just a coloured light. It can actually, and I think that was certainly the intent of the report coming back to include that sort of thing. Yep. No, it's a report. The intent is there.
Could I add one tiny piece of...
Sure.
This is regarding if anyone has seen the City of Perth building come Christmas time or any other event, RAC building, and there's many others. It's about significant events. When the Queen passes, which is going to be a really massive event and probably within our lifetimes, red, white and blue, you know. That's exactly the intention. Breast cancer, prostate cancer, anything related to colours and auspicious occasions.
Yep. Councillor Sargent.
Just quickly in relation to Councillor Ferranti's, across the road from the City of Perth Council building at Christmas time, they have this great, light, well not light show, mural of some form through digital, and I think that's what Councillor Ferranti's kind of referring to. We got some space there. We could do that at night time, and that could be an advertising form or a continuation to events that happen around the city of Stirling.
Sure.
Mr Mayor, I actually think it needs to be in there, not wanting to...
I don't think, I'm quite happy, No, let's be clear. This has been something I know at different times. Most of you would have asked or put a request through whether it be supporting the Ukraine people or supporting Pride Week or supporting. It's those simple things sometimes in terms of colouring a building to show support from council without being overtly political. It's just an easy option for this council. So, but all those different options will be taken on board with the understanding that there's been a big support from council. And unlike what was asked at question time, I'm sure there'll be big support from the community too. So I'll now put that motion. It might be. And that is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. We have item 14.2, the proposed notice of motion from Councillor Kristovich. Your motion, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That a report be presented to Council outlining both the current approach and opportunities to improve how the City deals with dogs off-leash within on-leash areas and dogs not under effective control, leading to attacks on people, other dogs and fauna.
Thank you. And is there a second for that motion? Councillor Farrelly, is anyone opposed? Yes, your question?
I'm a little bit confused. While I think that this is a great idea, and I think the comments are really good, I'm looking in reference to some other notices of motion and the reports. I'm just questioning why the answer was, we've already got rangers, we've already got the dog act, we already do it.
So, councillors, this is for a report to come to council. If you don't want to vote for it, don't vote for it.
That's the question I'm asking.
But you're not asking a question related to this. You're asking a question related to something that's happened previously.
I'm talking about the point is, why didn't the report say here, we already do it, we've got rangers, we've got dog act?
That's because we haven't had a report yet.
But that's the whole reason of having these little mini reports
Councillor.
for you to say no to notices of motion.
Thanks, councillor. You can vote against this if you'd like.
I know it's just about me.
And before we do put it to a vote, I do want to thank Ranger Daniel for dropping my little Max home the other day. So, yeah. Have you got a question? Question, councillor Farrell.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think this is an interesting topic, and what I'd like to expand it, if it's indulging the councillor that has put the motion forward, that on-spot fines be put to people that leave dumps on the park.
I think we'll wait for the report to come back outlining the current approach. Yeah. So I'm happy to put this motion. Thank you, councillors. Yeah. Thank you, and that is unanimous. Councillor Farrelly will happy to meet with anyone and explain that afterwards, if they'd like some more explanation. Item 15, questions by member of which due notice has been given. I have nil. Item 16, new business of an urgent nature. I have nil. Item 17, matters behind closed doors. Can I get a mover and a seconder now to go behind closed doors, please? Move, Councillor Thornton, seconded Councillor Perkoff. And just a show of hands, councillors. That's unanimous, thank you. Go behind closed doors so we can deal with items 17 and also item 12.2, 8.1 from previous. Move to open. Councillor Thornton raised a hand. Councillor Ferrante. All those in favour, please, a show of hands. That is unanimous. We now open the doors. That brings us to item 18, which is closure of the meeting. I declare the meeting closed at 9:15 p.m. Thank you very much, councillors. Councillors, if you've got your new meeting procedures, Jackson's happy